Oh, yeah. There he is.
She got paired with it one day, and she been true.
She was true. Sorry. I don't know for a long time.
Stop letting
All right, it's
Morning.
10 a.m. and we're all here, I think. So I'm going to go ahead and call to order the June 16th, 2026 budget workshop here at City Hall. Do we have anyone signed up for public comments?
No, sir.
Before we begin, this process allows us not only to hear the limitations and opportunities in the budget, but also to take information in as the budget's being formed. I'm specifically talking to Ms. Smith about this because this is her first workshop. This doesn't mean after today this budget is set. It just means this is the first part. If you have questions during the process, don't be shy, because there's lots of information and it comes very fast. All right, any other comments before we start? Who's going to lead off?
I will lead off, if that's all right with you, Mayor. All right, I'm going to be brief on this. Again, thank you all for coming. This is kind of the first big exposure to the enterprise funds, more specifically the water fund. It's going to be most of the couple hours here today. And I want to thank our team. They've done obviously an excellent job. They always do. We try to get y'all information a little bit earlier this year on some of the general funds, some of the priorities, and some of those things. There are a couple, one of your handouts, we're not going to dive into it because Julie is going to do way more of that than I am. But some of these handouts we really like in our budget process. This is what I use and what our team uses to kind of simplify this massive budget into more of a digestible thing. And typically you'll see things that are highlighted. We try to keep it plus or minus 10% is what we want to see. And that way we have some explanations or we can ask specific questions outside of the zero-based budgeting process. If there is anything else that y'all want to see on these documents, we're always kind of tweaking it, so please let us know. We can add it to it, especially for the general fund in future meetings. There is a priorities list in a couple slides. We'll kind of gloss over those. That's what we talked about during the strategic planning and council retreat. It is raw data. We're still compiling the actual executive summary in the report, but that is the raw data that came out of that. And with that, Mayor, I will turn it back over to you. Thank you.
There's a little legend also to tell you what is each of those categories on those highlighted sheets we told you about, just if you're interested to know what is charged through those categories.
And this corresponds with what?
These are items that are eligible to be expended in these
In
categories.
the water fund?
Yes.
All right, Ms. Barron?
Okay, you'd think we'd be over the jitters of this, but this many years, but still a little nervous doing this, so we want to make sure we give you good information as we go through this process. First, I want to kind of give credit where credit is due. Yes, we do a lot of work, but with Katrina and Jacob and David, this fund would be a lot more work than it is, so they've done a lot of work to get us here. These departments have presented their individual budgets to our budget committee. This is a little different, as Dalton said, for what you guys are used to seeing. Just gives you a little more detail, short of giving you every line item, which you really don't want to see. Jacob did create that key so you can say, well, what is in other? And so you can go there and look at that. And then if you want more detail, then you can provide that detail. But the level of detail and the number of pages it would take to get you all of that is too large. So it just gives you a guide and a way to dive into it if you want to. So I'm going to start with giving you a timeline, and the main reason I bring this up at each council meeting and then also at these kind of workshops is so that you guys and the public really know what is our timeline and then what are significant dates that are going to be important as we move along in the process. And so we'll have another workshop like this one on July 16th, which will be a very in-depth look at general fund and anything we don't cover today. And then we started, I believe, year before last, doing the follow-up post-filing workshop in August, and that seemed to be pretty well received and give us an opportunity to make sure if we need to make any changes from the time the budget was filed until the time it's presented. So we'll have that budget workshop again on August 6th. So we present the budget to you as well as a resolution for a tax rate on the 11th of August. And then the 2 readings will be on September 8th and September 22nd. As of now, that is our timeline. I don't anticipate that to change, but I want to just make sure we continue to put that out there so everyone has their calendars marked for anything significant. The next page here is top priorities, and so as you know, we had a city council retreat recently. We won't go into all of these, but these were what came to the top as you work through your process. The ones in yellow there are the ones that I felt really related to this fund, and that we continue to focus on these areas in 2050 all the time. But this, from your priorities, you can see that those things are still in the top as far as what you felt like was important, and we start allocating funds. Any questions or comments on any of the things we've talked about or just touched on? And I do want you to interrupt me. I know I tend to talk fast, so stop me if I'm going too fast. It's easier for us if this is casual, so we can answer questions as we go through it. And if there's something we get hung up on that I have further detail on, then I'll let you know that that's coming as well. So, quick look at economic trends. This is important to us because while it is a snapshot, trends kind of tell a story, and it helps us as we're doing projections and then also dealing with the here and now. And so, if you go back to August of 22, which we loved the budget year for 23, was very difficult because we were at a 9.2% inflation going into that year. And basically, the Fed started cutting rates and said, we're going to get us down to 2%. And they got close, but we're seeing a tick back up now. We haven't seen any reductions as far as cost of goods sold. We have seen leveling in the last couple of years, as we've talked to through our budget process. Fiscal year 23 was difficult because we were dealing with those inflations. So while we haven't seen reductions, at least we've seen what I'm going to call leveling in those costs. Inflation is ticking back up. We're right up about the 4.2, 4.3 mark again as of the end of May, up from, we were down in the 2s for a little while. So we don't expect to see any more cuts, so we're kind of going to base our future look at what we're seeing right now, of course, with the biggest thing we're facing across the city being energy costs. So the next slide is just looking at CPI, and so again, you can see energy there really having the biggest impact on our costs right now. And over to the right, excuse me, you can see fuel, gasoline, and again, that's impacting us citywide, but for the water fund, it's heavily petroleum based, so everything we do, and while we don't spend as much money on gas in the water fund, we do have pipe and chemicals and all the things that are driven by those petroleum based products. So we're really monitoring that just to make sure we're tracking on impacts, but we're pretty confident with the budget that we've created. And then the next one is just a more in detail look at fuel. The top left, you see the green line, that's California. We don't want to be there. The blue line is the national average, and the orange line is San Antonio. So those are costs of fuel at the pump. And again, you can see the impact of inflation as it started picking up there in March. So mostly that is being driven by energy and fuel costs. So May of 26 was 7% higher than April of 26. So pretty significant impact there. And then 26 May compared to May of 25, 40.5% increase in fuel. So the bottom right was just interesting. This is something I kind of show you every month as we start seeing an uptick in gas. The green is 24 month over month, the blue is 25, and the dark blue there are 26. And those are actual costs of fuel, cost per gallon and gallons used by the city. Now this is citywide. We're just trying to track what the overall impact is. The reason gallons are important to me is because of consistency. So we don't vary a lot. I would say no more than 2,000 gallons, and on a $50,000 fuel bill, that's not very many gallons. So we average between 12 and 14,000 gallons a month of fuel. So just kind of wanted you to know what we're monitoring and facing, and hopeful that will level or even start going back down as we go out of summer. Any questions on any of those things or how it might impact the budget? Okay, we'll move on. So the next one, and I'm not going to read these to you, but this is for your use as well as for the public, as we will post this presentation on the website, and I'm assuming it we're live recorded today, so that people can see really what each of our divisions within the water fund are responsible for. Again, Trina responsible for utility billing, David and Chris responsible for all of the production and collections part, and then general operations kind of falls on all of us. So if you have specific questions, want to ask more detailed information about those departments, that is who I would refer you to for those questions. So we have 7 departments, including general operations, and remember, general operations are expenses that relate to the entire fund, so it's hard to categorize them by department, so we lump them by fund, and that's gonna be things like workers' comp insurance, liability and property insurance, cybersecurity measures, then transfers out, of course, which we'll talk about in more detail. So you can kind of see a breakdown of what we service, the number of distribution lines and wastewater lines, reclaimed water, lift stations. Of course, we know those were heavily impacted by the flood. And again, I think a lot of gratitude goes to Chris for that lift station repair. He did a ton of work to get those lift stations back up and working quickly, and then completed that project for FEMA. So I think everyone on our staff is now a FEMA finance expert, so we definitely appreciate the support there. At the bottom, these are historical FTEs for the water fund. And again, we'll probably say this 100 times and have for the past, 8 years that I've been here. Costs in the water fund are not dependent on consumption. So if consumption goes down, costs don't necessarily go down. We're driven by other factors. Really, our budget's built on the needs of the operation and what that looks like to provision of services for our customers. And then as you look at FTEs, when we get into general fund, we'll look at citywide impact because there were some shifts here based on what duties were actually being performed. So maybe we were doing some transfers to a lot for a percentage of certain positions that really were 95% or better water fund. And so there was some movement of 2 positions over the last 5 years from general to water that we were including in a transfer that we just didn't feel like was necessary. So the impact is not necessarily the growth on the city, and we'll bring you that in more detail whenever we do that. So really, 1 maintenance position was added in 2024, I believe, 2023. And that was so that we had a more proactive maintenance program within water production. So again, David can speak to more of those things if you would like it. So diving into budget, the next page is going to give you just an overview, and then as we go through this, I will dissect some of these things for you in more detail. We are right now at a $130,000 deficit. And we'll talk about what that looks like, some options for getting that balanced, and kind of what our next steps are for that. We have $18.2 million in revenues currently budgeted based on our water model, $18.3 million in expenses. So 4.3% increase, about $750,000 increase over 26 budget. That is really in line with where we are from an inflationary standpoint in the economy right now. It does also pretty close align with the 5-year forecast that we've been building year over year. So when we build a budget and go back and look at it, we're like, okay, were we right? How close were we? Where were we wrong? What areas are going to be impacted more than others and those things? And it's pretty in line with what we've been projecting. These increases are different. We have a $200,000 higher debt payment this year. Remember, debt is structured according to the capacity per year, so it's not unusual for debt to fluctuate a little bit. It doesn't mean our principal balances are changing, it's just our payment schedules. Water franchise fee, a $200,000 increase there. That's assuming 5% compared to our current 4%, and we'll talk about that a little bit as we go forward. Health increase, again, we're having this conversation, and I went back and looked all the way back to 23 and 22. We were talking about it then. We went from a 5% to a 15% to last year's big increase, and here we are again. And so we'll be having a lot more conversation about that, but that is, for this fund, about $134,000 impact, assuming a 30% increase. But it's TBD. It's still too early for us to really put a needle in that, and so we wanted to be as liberal, I guess, as we could there, so that hopefully that is a mechanism to help us balance as we get closer to knowing what that number really is. We have some new capital items, which David will talk about, and then an increase of $75,000 in sustainability, which I will say this fund has been doing a super good job of in the past 3 to 4 years. So we'll talk about that. Okay. So assumptions for fiscal year 27, increases only to the base rate, and Trina is going to get into that when we start talking about proposed revenues and really what that methodology looked like over the last several years, how we are coming up with those numbers and those recommendations. We're not recommending any volumetric increases. We didn't last year either. And so really kind of trying to keep the customer on the forefront while taking care of operations at the same time. So increases to reuse to reclaimed water rates, which we talked in detail about last year, and then continued reduction on dependency of irrigation, and we'll talk about that in the revenue section too. Very conservative operational expenses. Departments really were challenged to turn in a flat or less than last year budget, with the exception of personnel and sustainability measures. They did that. A lot of the ways they did that was really going through and saying, do we have any contingency built in our line items anywhere? And taking that out and let us budget contingency at fund level, which we've always done. So Chris and his team really dove into some things in detail, did some historical looks at what was being spent, and were able to get some things flat or less than last year. Continued emphasis on sustainability, and we'll talk about that more, but asset replacement at $675,000, CIP at $575,000, which is going to be critical in the coming years, and then reducing the facility system replacement from 125 to 100, and we'll talk about that. Transfers, of course, are to meet debt obligations first, so that by law has to be taken care of first. That's $4.9 million. Cover administrative costs provided to the water fund by the general fund, and those are things like finance, legal, engineering, admin, a whole host of things that we run a calculation on every year based on percent of FTEs, based on percent of CIP projects, and a lot of other factors to determine what that transfer is. So that's estimated at this time, but it'll be pretty close. But until we wrap up the general fund, it's going to be hard to say exactly to the penny what that will be. And then pay our street use fee, our utility franchise, and then the water's provision of services that Development Services provides.
I have a question.
Yes, please.
What's the pay street use? What's that?
So
That the water fund pays?
correct. What is that?
Yeah.
So it's similar to a franchise fee. I don't know where it got the term street use fee. It came up years ago, as long as I've been here. Basically, the water fund, because of the nature of their business, cuts roads, that the general fund has to repair, and some other situations. KPUB pays us a franchise fee, gas, Atmos
But
pays us
the franchise
one.
fee, is that separate from this, or?
It's the same, yeah, so it's the same. That's why sometimes I'm like, it is the franchise fee, we call it a street use fee. I don't know where that
So it's
term,
just the franchise?
correct, yes. I'm not sure how that term came, so I kind of put it both so that everyone was making that correlation. Okay, I'll jump into forecasting real quick if y'all don't have any questions so far. Okay, so this forecast you should be used to seeing. It's going to give you 3 years of actual. Our chart goes back a lot further than this and goes out a lot further than this. 26 is budget, and then 27 is proposed. You can see that $130,000 out of balance down there at the bottom. But I would point out this is a living document, so this changes. You know, I may put this in the budget book and it might change the day after, just based on what's happening with trends or those kind of things. So we update this on a regular basis so that we are forecasting out hopefully correctly. Our fund balance is very healthy in the water fund, so our policy is between 15 and 25% of cash and receivables, which is a little different than 15 to 25% of expenses in the general fund. That's just kind of industry standard. But if you look out, we're well above the 25%, moving out all the way to 2032. So that's the thing I really look at when I'm looking at how are we going to do things moving forward is, are we okay on reserves? And are we healthy as far as if we had a big expenditure that we had to make? When I look at this, I wanted to really point out significant takeaways from this. So, you know, fiscal year 23, and I didn't pull the budget in, I probably should have. That was a heavy budget year because of where we were in 22 when we were building that budget. We just didn't know. We probably budgeted a little heavier than we needed to, so we had some surplus in 23 because things started falling off compared to what they were when we built the budget as far as leveling of expenses. But from 27, comparing to 23, we have an overall fund increase of $3.4 million. And when I looked at that, I want to know where that is. And so if I'm an auditor or sitting in your seat, I want to know if I'm looking at that kind of difference, what is it? So I broke it down to say between 27 compared back to 23, $1 million that increases personnel. Now, whether that's compounded salary growth, whether that's market adjustments for whatever reason, health insurance, pretty hefty piece of that. And some other components. 500,000 of that is operational costs. Remember, comparing to 23, that's not real big because the biggest bulk of that was 23. The biggest thing is the $2 million increase in transfers out, so that makes up the bulk of it, and about $1 million of that is sustainability measures that we've put in place over the last 3 or 4 years. So that made me a little more comfortable when I start breaking it out like that, and really looking at what the focus of our budget has been over the last 3 to 4 years. So increases driven by inflation, of course, we know personnel, insurances, not just health insurance, but, and Kim can speak to this, liability insurance and property insurance has just gone crazy. I would say, just on a random guess, we're 30% higher than we were 4 years ago, because we're looking at 15 to 20 this year, based on our meeting recently. So that has had a big impact on it. Cost of assets, we all know what that is as we look at police cars and vehicles and tractors and things that we buy. The cost of assets has gone up significantly too. So, and then supplies, of course, are always impacted that way, especially in this fund. So FY25 saw the heaviest increase year over year, but again, for all the reasons that we just talked about, but primarily a super heavy focus on sustainability as you look at those transfers out in the bottom lines there for capital projects, facilities, and specifically asset replacement, which we're going to get into a little bit more later. So looking forward, if we look from 28 and 29, I would expect 3 to 3.5% revenue increase. That doesn't necessarily correlate to rates, so we have some growth factor built in there in those things. Of course, we constantly, I can speak for Trina and I and our conversations with Dalton, of course, customer is on top of mind, and we want to provide the services that are necessary and that they expect, but we do want to keep in mind the impact that we're having on customers as we have to make rate adjustments and those things. We have very conservative line item increases minus sustainability in the next couple of years, just because we need to kind of do what we have to do to get through fiscal year 29 when we have a pretty hefty debt payment fall off. And so if you look at 2030 and out, you can start seeing positive fund balances with some very big increases to sustainability. So going up to like $1 million on CIP transfers, $850 on asset replacement, was still the potential of no to little, maybe 1% or 2% of rate increase. So we're getting there. We just need to get through 29 when we have that big debt payoff. You're going to see a lot relief right there. Any questions on the forecast? Okay. So let's hop into expenditures then. The first page again, I'm not going to read this to you. We talked about the key that's been provided to you so that if you have detailed questions, you'll know what's in each line item. You have your handout that's by department, but this is just kind of for the public and for you guys to let you know how things are categorized. So we'll show you by category that you're used to seeing every month, and the handout that you have is by subcategory, so a little bit more detail than you're used to seeing month over month. So let's look at proposed expenses. I'm a graphical person, so when I draw a graph like this or create a graph like this, red flags stick out to me, so I like to see it graphically so that we can dig in where we feel like we need to. So again, like the general fund, heavy personnel driven. If you remove the transfers, our personnel is about 57% of our operations, which aligns with general fund and aligns with other cities as far as personnel to operations. You can see year over year, I gave you all the way back to 22. So of course you can see some increase in 23, a little bit of increase in 24, and then some leveling there minus capital and transfers as we go into 25 and forward. So transfers are a big part of the water fund, and that is because the water fund is an enterprise fund, so operates like a business. So the general fund, as far as debt is concerned, when those monies come into the city, they're automatically allocated to our debt service fund. And so because we're collecting revenues to pay debt, we have to transfer those monies out into that debt service fund. So a little bit different structure, which is why your transfers look bigger in the water fund. And I do have some detail on those as we go forward. But you can see commitment to sustainability as you look at growth, personnel, capital, and transfers out, which has been this council and a mix of the last few councils' priority and direction to us. So the next is kind of the same, but this just gives you expenses by category with some breakdown on specific transfers out and what those dollars amounts are for each. Total increase to the fund, again, 4.3%, in line with inflation as of May. So really looking at March, April, May, about the same as far as inflation. We've already talked about the drivers, of course, being group health, sustainability, and then property and liability. I would say those are our biggest. There are some, you can see on the right, personnel has an increase of 3.2. Now, the reason that is not a higher, because we have insurance rolled in there, is because we had some tenured employees who were ready for retirement for 20-something years. And so when we had a couple of those tenured people retire, it changes our salary base, and so backfilling them had a reduction in salaries, and you'll see that also in your handouts, and then some restructuring of personnel to backfill those positions. So it does assume a 3% cost of living increase for all employees. That's what we have plugged citywide right now. That increase in group health, which is TBD at this time, we're still working through that. And then you'll see some decreases. So the reds are increases and the greens are decreases. So small increases were 2.8%. Might seem like a lot, it's $28,000. We did put fuel back to 2022 actuals because that was the best baseline we could come up with at the time, because we were in an upward fuel price situation whenever we built this, and so we went back to what was our highest year based on the price per pump. So there could be a little bit of give there. We usually will modify fuel and utilities all the way up until July. So if we can find a little bit of money here or there, then we'll continue to monitor that and make those changes. Decrease in maintenance, a lot of that when we were looking at it, decrease in vehicle and equipment maintenance has really dropped since we've had a heavier focus on asset replacement and not having 20-plus-year-old vehicles on the road and equipment, dump trucks that were 30 years old and those kind of things. So we have seen a pretty significant decline in vehicle maintenance, and then again, just removing some contingency that was kind of built in to some departments. Really not anything big except for the capital increase there of $108,000, which we'll talk through in a minute, and then the increase to transfers, which we talked through a little bit, and I'll show you more detail on slide 10.
So your maintenance
Yes,
goes down with newer vehicles, but your depreciation goes up.
that's correct.
So we're really looking at,
We don't budget depreciation citywide. It's pretty standard practice. It's an after the fact. I'm going to say it's an entry that we do after the fact. It does impact your overall fund balance as far as not on the cash side for budgeting, but when you group, the operating fund and asset replacement fund and all of our CIP funds and things like that, because we depreciate vehicles and facilities and all of those things, water lines in the ground, everything as a lump sum depreciation. So you do see that on your financials, just not in the budget.
trying to make sense of that.
It's government budgeting, yes, it's different.
So you just do the depreciation at the end of the year? Or
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So
We do depreciation at the end of the year. It is
you don't
recorded.
have the end of the year in the budget?
No, we do not, because it's not a cash entry. And so with our assets grow, it gets offset by depreciation, so. And I can show you that. I can walk you through that in the
Well, I can
financials.
understand, but
Yeah.
I'm not understanding why, I guess.
Yeah, it is pretty industry standard. I haven't found a city yet that budgets for depreciation we look at budget as basically revenue and expenses. And then our depreciation impacts our,
Just a cash budget.
correct. That's correct.
We had one city that did do depreciation as a cash, and it really either overinflated or underinflated the cash budget since it has to be
Oh,
balanced
yeah,
zero.
that doesn't
so,
work, but,
yeah. It's still reflected on the financials, but not on the cash side of the budget.
The hope is we're budgeting for enough assets to offset a lot of that depreciation. Because we would, if we budgeted depreciation, we would have to increase revenue somewhere or decrease expenses. So it's pretty standard, a little bit different in governmental. We don't need the tax offset too, like a corporation does, so.
No, but we need to know what we're doing,
Mhm.
and you don't know what you're doing if you're not keeping track of the depreciation.
We track it, we just, yes, it's just not in a line item for budget.
So when you look at year to year to year, and I think most of my analysis has been, and not just for water, so this is, I guess, a question for, the whole budget, so, guess I'll have to look and see if I'm just doing, I think I've got actual in the end, so my spreadsheet that I gave you.
Yes, sir.
Would be from the year end, right, and so
Yes.
there would be depreciation in those.
Yes, if you pull them from our financial reports, there is depreciation. But keep in mind, depreciation for the water fund is grouped, because when we do financials, we pull all water fund funds together into one. So you're gonna have full asset depreciation across the city, whether it was capital project or it was vehicles and equipment or anything like that. It's grouped for financial reporting. We only break out the budget by individual funds just for transparency. We could group it, but it would make it really ugly and a lot less consistent, because capital projects and assets swing your budget so much.
So that's why you transfer out for CIP?
That's right. Yeah, because CIP will be year over year, projects won't be completed in the same year, to where your operating budget ends at 9/30. And so,
But your fixed assets are not
correct,
year to year.
correct.
It's not a project, that's,
Right, and we may have a $500,000 spend for assets one year and a $700 the next, which would really make your operating budget. I like to see consistency in operating budgets and kind of level operating expenses, and it's hard to dissect and pick those anomalies out of there if you have.
you're saying the equipment purchases might be 500,000 or 700,000?
Correct.
Well, those are expenses.
Say
They're
again?
cash out, but they're
Yes.
not expenses. Right, okay.
Okay, so the next slide is just, again, a lot of charts, but this is historical spending by department. I pulled the transfers out of here just so you could get a more granular look at operating. And so you can see that really our FTEs correspond with budget, obviously, since personnel is our heaviest expense. But this just gives you a look year over year at what each department has done and how their change has happened over the years. So again, you have more detail on that on the sheets that you were handed, and I believe that it goes back all the way to 24. So we have information beyond that if that's something you wanted to see. So those handouts will align with this chart right here. So the next one really, I think, goes into more detail on what we were just talking about as far as historical transfers. So places that money goes, so revenue comes into the water fund, into Fund 2 for our purposes. And then it gets moved out to other corresponding funds that support the enterprise fund or a part of the enterprise fund for financial reporting. So development services, asset replacement, of course, that we continue to talk about. Facility fund, which we just started in 24, so you can see that little bitty startup in 24, and then small pieces there. That one is getting healthier. We'll talk about that in a minute. CIP, you can see a growth there in transfers, to where before we kind of said, well, if we have surplus at the end of the year, we're going to move it to CIP. And so what would happen is we ended up with no cash in CIP if we had a hard year, and then we're trying to do projects that were more reliant on debt, or we had an emergency that now we're trying to deal with. So being intentional about that has given us a little bit of freedom to take care of emergencies and also do some future planning. Like, for example, we have to do design on a project before we can even look at what funding looks like. So we try to do a set aside for those kind of things, so we can take care of the initial pieces before we go and tackle what is this going to cost and how are we going to pay for that as far as our master plan. There's your franchise fee or your street use fee, again, increasing that from 4% to 5% to really align with industry standards. We have found that industry standard is between 5 and 7 for not just water, but for utility companies and those kind of things. So this has kind of given us that step up. I kind of outlined there at the bottom different entities that pay franchise fees to us and what those are. So Atmos, 5%, and they are the highest from a revenue standpoint as well. Cable is 5%. Now that gets split into both our PEG, which is public educational support that we do, and I'm going to bolster that, but basically supports our TV channels, our live streaming meetings, things like that. And that money, some of those monies go over there, and then the rest goes to the general fund. So, and then phone companies are per line charge. So, just
So
wanted to give you-
how's that, so less and less phone lines?
Yes. So, for example, Hill Country Telephone, Kinetic, those places, they pay us a franchise fee based on phone lines, and so it's between 40 cents and 87 cents, and there's a lot of little caveats in there to that. It's hard to dissect, but we get a report on that once a quarter in a franchise fee.
So anyway, phone lines are going down. People are using cell phones.
Yeah, but it's pretty steady. It has something to do with the fiber as well and the towers. There's a whole lot of mixed bag of calculation in there. The phone is a lot harder to understand.
Telecommunications.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a lot harder to dissect, but it's basically a per line, the way to do it.
Is the K-pop 3%? Is that a very old rate?
Very, we tracked it back to the nineties, I think, in the, I can't remember.
I love
Oh, I'm sorry,
it.
2003, 2003,
That's a pretty long time.
it has.
Any chance that that would be a talking point? for
So,
them?
yes, ma'am. So we have been in discussions with them for a while. We do have some other considerations, that we can talk about later. We are gonna ask kind of just consensus today on if y'all want us to start exploring the legal side of it, what it's gonna take to do that for council, and be prepared for the general fund on the franchise fee. So we are gonna be asking for some consensus on if we want to pursue that or not.
What would we use to determine how much of an increase we should ask for? Should we check with other cities?
So we're kind of using the industry standard, ours is, we can look at other co-ops, ours is kind of different, and every co-op is not really apples to apples as far as electric companies. We do own it, it's got a separate board, separate GM. We do have a lot of data that we've started benchmarking already on, we've already kind of been in discussions, we actually were in discussions with them almost 2 years ago and starting this process. And so ideally what we'll do is we will bring y'all options, kind of a matrix, if you will, of what those options would be, but just food for thought, 1% is about $450,000, give or take, off of current revenue. So we will be asking for some consensus on that if y'all would like us to pursue the research and the data in preparation for the general fund.
I'm gonna pause for a second, and any questions so far on anything we've talked about, or anything you would like to see different or more of?
I noticed that we have budgeted, this current budget, 55 full-time employees. How many of those positions are actually filled?
Kim, how many, I think we have 1 or 2 positions vacant in the water fund. David, you can probably tell me that right off the head.
Vacant, oh gosh, probably more than one.
Because we had 1 retire this month.
Yeah,
So 3?
Three, about 3.
We have 3.
Yeah. Usually the water fund is a smaller percentage, of course, than the general fund because fewer employees, but it varies a little bit. The highest I could find a vacancy was 3 or 4 when I was looking back, but that's not maybe the most adequate data
Yeah, I
coming
think-
out of my head.
Right, we've had some movement lately, so I would say about 3 vacancies.
I'm gonna let David talk through these new requests because they directly relate to water production, and I will not get that correct, so.
All right, so we'll go to the new request. The top section there is for water production.
So the top 3 bullet points there is for SCADA, which is a supervisory control and data acquisition. Just allows us to monitor these 3 sites remotely and not have to go out there manually. So it does improve with our efficiencies and our proactive monitoring. As far as the bottom one, well site cameras, that's to increase some security. We did have a couple of issues, or a recent issue over at College Cove. So we want to make sure we got that site secure with some updated cameras, and also at West Bluff, get another set of cameras up there as well. So as far as the next bullet point on the asset replacement for wastewater collections, that's adding a $65,000 unit, which is our Titus Twister.
It is not a margarita machine, by the way.
No, it's not.
It is real, we verified it.
Yeah, we'll have that in place. That's gonna be a game changer for our wastewater collection staff. It allows definitely operational efficiencies. It's able to break down some solids in our lift stations. It sort of decreases the need to take our heavier units out there to back out some larger items from our lift stations. So it's going to be a huge game changer for us. And again, no new FTE request at this time.
So where do you use the Titus Twister? Where's that? So,
So-
looks like it's
It's
set
a-
permanently there, so it's not.
That's going to be our mobile.
It's a mobile.
That's a
unit.
mobile unit. And we can set it at at a lift station, come back overnight, and then take it somewhere else. It would probably take a couple of hours if we didn't have this to back out some of the solids that we don't want our pumps to have to pump to our treatment plant. So it's definitely a huge benefit for us.
So does it break down the solids like?
Yes, yes. It's like a vortex in there that, yeah, it breaks it.
That's what I say, like a blender. But that's
Pretty much.
what I-
Yeah.
So if I need you, I can call you. Hopefully not.
Any questions?
Yeah, any questions on these items?
So I guess it fits in a truck pretty easily, and I can't tell how big it is actually.
Yeah, we did a demo on, it'll fit on the trailer. We've outfitted a couple of lift stations that are, plug and play, they're ready. Guys liked it. I was really impressed. We took some site visits over in New Braunfels and also
Oh,
looked at.
so you know a lot about it.
Yeah, it's probably stands about, we say,
About 3 feet?
The
Titus
column?
The Titus twister?
3 or 4 feet.
3 or 4 feet.
Okay, no taller than me.
And SCADA stands for Supervisory Control and Data Acquisition, is that correct? I had to look it up, I just want to make sure I had it.
So I think Councilmember Smith, whenever you came visit us at Public Works, I think Chris had it on the screen
Oh,
where she was able to monitor all the lift stations, all the well sites, so it's, yeah. Tanks, so that's how we monitor our system remotely.
Okay, let's jump into asset replacement. This is a big part of our conversation over the last several years, as you know. So in this fund are replacement vehicles, equipment, and other assets that we routinely replace throughout the system. Really helps us keep, reliable equipment, safety for our employees, and then efficiency because we don't have things broken down as much. And then we've proven that costs are reduced by keeping our fleet healthy. So y'all can read through that if you want to. I'll save you the detail. But the next slide is really looking at the detail. This basically gives you, going into 27, our estimated beginning fund balance. A lot of it hinges on whether everything we have budgeted in 26 actually comes in, that it comes in at the price that we budgeted for and all those things. And then where our revenues come from, either our budgeted transfer in, which of course is our largest one. We do sell our assets, so as we get rid of the truck, we sell it either on an auction site or some sort of auction so that it is public fairness, those things. And then we get a little bit of interest in this fund as well based on how much cash is in there at the time. Existing leases, so we do use Enterprise for, I'm going to call it a lease-to-own situation with our vehicles. We don't use it with every vehicle. It kind of depends on the cash available in the fund, what we want to restrict moving forward, because if we have, in this case, $45,000 in lease payments for next year, then that's money that we can't use because it's not free anymore. As long as we have a 4-year lease or a 5-year lease or whatever the term is, then those monies are set aside. So we monitor kind of the percent of the comfort level for each fund on what our fund balance can handle so that we make sure it's healthy enough to be able to buy the things that we cannot lease or choose not to lease. So also in here we have replacement of aging meters and infrastructure. We started this 3 years ago. Our current metering system was changed over in 2012. And so I will say our guys are very good about monitoring warranties. And so if things aren't working correctly and they're still within their warranty, we're sending those back and they're being replaced with new units and those kind of things. But we are aging. 2012 was a long time ago. And so we're seeing things that aren't in warranty anymore and things that just have to be replaced. And so this has proved to be pretty effective. We're not seeing as many breakdowns and stuff. So each year we've been budgeting this for about the past couple years. And our guys are doing the install and the change out themselves. So we're not having outside costs associated with that. And then you can see the vehicles through there that we're planning on replacing. That are either just aged out or could be in bad repair. And so all of those conversations are had throughout the year to try to make the best decisions. You can also see the new item request down there for the Titus Twister, which is going to be considered an asset, so it would be in this fund.
And Julie and David and their teams have been instrumental over the last 4 years to really get the fixed asset replacement off the ground. It was one of the areas that needed some improvement. I think there was vehicles that were early 2000 or late 2000, and they finally have gotten the process and the plan to actually start doing it. So we started seeing the increase in cost, of course, so we can make sure that we're replacing those vehicles on time.
It's really important.
And to that point, the next couple of slides is basically exactly that. So Jacob has built out basically a 10-year replacement schedule, working with individual departments, needs, working with the garage to kind of identify what do we think is going to need to be replaced when. And so you can see this next forecast through 2031 divided by department, by expense. The idea, and you can see why I don't like this in the regular operating fund because of the swings in expense. In a perfect world, it would be level, but when you have a dump truck 1 year, that's $175,000 compared to 2 trucks, One year it doesn't even equate. So it just gives you a really good picture of what the need is gonna be, and this shifts every year. So we revisit this every year at budget time and say, okay, this is what it's in the plan, is this what we still need? Do we even need this at all? And we've made some shifts from vehicles to UTVs instead, and some changes to upgraded mowers, 2-for-1 kind of situation. And so our team spent, 18 months.
Oh, yeah, I'll say over
I
years.
mean, they went out and looked at serial numbers and crawled trailers and what do we own and does it match our assets and what do we need and what can we get rid of? And so this has been a really good process that we can finally say, I'm comfortable with this. So if you look at the bottom there, you can see ending fund balance is what I look at, and then try to compare that to what the need is. And what I really would like to see is when we get to 29, to where our revenues actually exceed what our anticipated expenses are. So we're not dipping into fund balance anymore at that point. So it just is kind of a growth perspective in looking at what we can do to make sure that our fleet stays healthy. And then the next slide, you can see a better, yes,
2030 has, the wave is much larger.
yes.
So a couple reasons. So, and as we do these, even though these are on an annualized basis for the budgets, the debt that we're doing to KPUB falls off in 29, and so that's all coming out of expense versus out of the debt fund, which goes for interest and sinking on the general fund. So once that falls off, we're gonna be able, so we are anticipating a lot of our price points with customers, some of our CIPs, some of our general, our fixed assets, all of those things we're factoring in. In 29, we're gonna see a large increase, so we're trying to make that transition.
Okay, thank you.
Julie, you and I have talked about leases and
Yes.
all kind of stuff. I'm sure the city has a fleet number,
We do?
and there's one-time leases that you can do through like GM or Ford.
Yes.
So you just pay for one time, so like 27, you pay for 3 years on a lease. And
Right.
you wouldn't have a lease payment in 28 or 29.
We can structure them like that on our current plan, but most of the time, we need cash to buy other things, and so if we go out and spend, we pay for 3 years in one, then all that cash leaves to where, did we need a dump truck or whatever, and so when we've got $800,000 to play with, but we might as well have bought it and owned it, I guess, is kind of our take on it. So we look at it like that too, and look at long-term projections and cash flow. How much money are we gonna have, and then, there's always the question of what is gonna be the approved transfer. And so while I may tell you, and if you look at the next slide, you can see, I may tell you that based on our need, we need $800,000, we need $900,000 or whatever. But if, say, this council came back and said, well, we don't wanna do this rate or whatever, we potentially would be taking that transfer out of here. So we don't wanna get cash poor, I guess, in the asset replacement plan, because then if those transfers do not meet what our projections say they should be for whatever reason, then we would have to decrease expenses. So if it's a cash balance. Really just looking at cash flow forecasting in great detail.
Thank you.
Does that answer that?
It does, yes,
Okay,
ma'am.
okay.
I figured you probably had the fleet and all that stuff. I just wanted
Yes,
to
sir.
make sure.
We use that quite a bit, and Enterprise does use fleet pricing as well. And sometimes we find that it's cheaper to do dealer pricing. So we really try to source we turn over every rock, believe me. Poor Jacob, you can ask him. I'm like, we can save $100 if we do it this way. So we look at that in detail before we buy every asset. And of course, if our package is over 100, we're bringing those to you and getting, even if they're budgeted, and telling you what we're doing. Any other questions on asset replacement? Okay. So I'm gonna turn this next section over to Trina. But again, stop her if you have any questions on either debt or those others.
All right, so we're looking at debt service, and obviously it's one of the largest expenses in both funds, in general fund and water fund. So 27 annual debt service is $4,933,000. That equates to approximately 27.1% of the overall water fund revenues. Our financial management policy states that we must stay under our 35% of our revenues. So we're well below that. We have a little wiggle room. But even so, you have to always consider that bill you have to pay if you're trying to increase that. We recently heard back from our financial advisors on conducting a capacity analysis for us to see if there is any openness for debt issuances. We haven't got back on that completely to the full yet, but we will be working through that later this month, just to see where we're at and down through the years if there is anywhere to give us the amounts and what we're eligible to do. Looking at this graph here, you can see obviously 2030 is when we will have some wiggle room. Again, Dalton said that KPUB will fall off in 2029. And that's just what we're looking forward to. Right now, we are holding debt issuances back to 2015 at the moment is what we're paying on. And our last issuance was the 2023 revenue bonds. All right, this next chart here, we brought this to council when we did issue the 23 revenue bonds. This sort of chart kind of gives you a layman's look at how capacity works. Looking at this, we, in the pink line here, before you do anything, you have to pay your existing debt service. So that pink line here on the chart shows the year over year. This is a good 30-year look of what debt service is. And then in government finance, you start working your way up. So in the blue line here, we have our transfers out. And these are the goals we've set for ourselves internally on the sustainability pieces. All those transfers out that Julie's been talking about, so to CIP, to a facility fund, all those things. And then that also includes the admin fee for what the water fund pays the general service fund for the services they provide to them. Next on the graph is the green section, and that is the true operational expenditures, just the everyday cost of operating the systems and keeping it running, personnel and all that included. And lastly, the black line at the top are your revenues that are generated out of all the services we provide. So as you can see, the 2030, there is a window that opens up there. We will have less debt service paying out, and that is basically what you call the capacity. You have that room right there to play with to see if there's any debt issuances available that we can sell.
Are we anticipating need of debt or something?
One of the things that we're looking at, and an area that we are improving, is we have a lot of CIP plans. So we have master plans that have different projects, different goals, what we're trying to accomplish, and of course city council's goals. The two big ones right now we're obviously looking at, we have an event tomorrow night is Elm Creek, and then a potential well. Those are probably the biggest priorities from council currently. What we're working on doing is coming up with kind of a 5 or 10 year CIP plan that'll show funding. How much cash do we need? If there's bond series that we want to take out for them, what grants we could potentially get, or whatever. That is one area that we can make some improvements on, and we are looking at doing. So not necessarily we have to take out debt, but we can use a combination of all of these different things to fund different projects as the needs arise over the next 5 or 10 years.
I have a question. How much is it costing us to do this tomorrow night? I'm just curious.
Off the top of my head, I don't know.
I mean,
Consort, 28,000.
and that's the rental of the place?
The rental is part of an agreement we have.
It is free.
Yeah, that's right. So it's really your time and the presentation?
Presentation,
Production
the
and
surveys
all
that
of
they're
that.
conducting,
Oh, I
the
see,
pieces
right,
put together. We're utilizing them from a strategic communication standpoint, to
Right.
make sure we get the right message out.
Hard is
so,
gonna be packed.
yeah, we're looking forward to it. We'll see. We've had a lot of questions or a lot of responses on that survey, so it's good stuff that we've been getting, so
Good,
looking
money
forward
well
to it.
spent then.
They're getting good response. Or executive response. Both.
A little bit of both, but they're valid. They're valid questions. Yeah. So we'll look to address those tomorrow.
Recorded? I mean, was it recorded?
I believe so. Yeah, I think Martin said he'll be up in the booth. Yeah, I think he may be streaming it. Yeah, I believe so.
All right, any further questions on capacity? All right, jumping into capital improvement projects, or CIP is what we call it. Many times our CIP are funded, as Dalton said, by debt issuances, but not always. We really do try hard to look at other funding, grants, or outside sources if we can. But I will say, we have been very diligent in trying to feed this pot because there's really no startup. We need to, if there's a conceptual design that comes up, or as the Quinlan Creek Interceptor, you know, it's a grant project we're hoping to get, but if it's shovel ready, then we can move on, but you gotta have the funds to get that design and engineering out of the way. So we've been trying to feed the pot as much as we can with the sustainability transfers and go that route, just so we have some beginning cash. This graph represents the budget and the actual amounts that we've sent over to CIP each year. As you can see, early in 2016, 17, 18, the attempts were there, but then you see where the economy turned on us with COVID and all the high inflation. So 22, we tried to pick back up, didn't do that great. 23, 24, 25, 26, this is where we've been hot and heavy and making sure that these transfers go into our budget, and we're able to do that. And then you can see there in the black, those projections of what we hope to do. We're gonna try really hard to fulfill those commitments there. And again, as Dalton said, after 2030, it jumps up because we will have some openness. We will have a little bit more surplus or flexibility to feed the fund even more so. Engineering contracts these days are $500,000, and that's just the beginning stage of it. So we need to do the best we can and get there. This next slide here, we have the current CIP projects that we're working on. And again, in 2022, Public Works brought the updated water and wastewater master plan to you, just to let you know what we need to do. If it's any delayed maintenance, or if there's any infrastructure that needs to be replaced or rehabbed. There's $115 million in needs. So most of those needs we will pay for out of the capital improvement fund. Over to the right, you can see the 2023 water revenue bonds. So when we came to council, or after that master plan was done, council suggested that maybe we go out and start trying to bite off some of this. So we did issue debt. We had a couple options. I think it was anywhere from $10.5 million to $12.5 million that we could issue at that time. That was our capacity. We took the $11.5 million pot there. And the projects here in this chart with the red text, the red text are the projects we have completed and are done. Those were all paid by revenue bonds. As you can see, the black are still ongoing. And we just have a remaining $328,000 left out of that $12.5 million that we received. So we have a lot more to go. Other projects that we're working on
So,
here.
wait just a second.
Yes,
So,
sir.
the red ones are complete, and we got all those other ones we borrowed money for, but
They're still active and working. They're open.
active, what do you mean active and open? I
Basically,
mean, that's the total amount, so the Ridgewood standpipe demolition, 250,000. So, you mean active and open? Has anything been spent on that?
yes. So this is taking the whole $12.4 million and what projects we've allocated out to.
Right.
Yes, I didn't show how much has been spent in each project, but
Okay.
these are active
Okay.
and.
But the 328,000 is enough to finish all those projects.
That's what's left over.
Yeah, that's excess unallocated.
Yeah,
So,
I guess.
okay, so that's not, okay, so it's not, haven't spent 12,113,000.
We haven't committed it to anything specific as of right now.
Oh, no. Have you spent 12,113,000, or that's just what's been allocated?
It's gonna be encumbered. We can get you all the actual cost or completion of each project and how much has been
Oh,
spent.
I don't know if I need that, I just trying to understand
Yeah,
the
no,
numbers
it's,
here.
it's encumbered all but 375,000 or whatever. That's the
So-
only unallocated amount. Everything else has been encumbered.
Okay, so at this point, we feel like we allocated for all that, and all those are gonna come in on target.
That's always the
Depends
hope.
on how long it takes.
Which, I mean, knock on wood, par for the course on public safety facility and the 20 million in debt. We've done a great job at value engineering everything and trying to keep everything within budget, so.
So we got a pretty good pile of money somewhere that we haven't spent yet from the 23 bond issue.
328,000. But
No.
again,
So we spent all the 12,113,000, and we only have 328 left.
it's encumbered.
It's accounted for.
Okay, how much have we spent?
So,
Yeah.
We can give you that
Councilmember-
breakdown.
No, no, I mean,
I think I can answer this.
Yeah, I mean, it's 10 million, 8 million.
So when we say unallocated, some of that is, for example, the wastewater treatment plant design. I brought that contract to you. We've only spent probably a quarter of that, but the entire contract is budgeted. So the 650 that you see is designated for that project specifically.
So yes, it is collecting interest. So anything, so there is cash in our pooled funds of the things that are encumbered but haven't been spent yet, but we can get y'all like what has actually been spent or the percentage of each project that has,
So about 7 million
about 7 million.
has been spent, and that's about.
So that's, well, I don't know.
We'll get you that.
That's a lot of numbers, Mr. McKinney.
But
But,
we can get
I
it.
mean, you got a pot of money someplace you
Yes.
can track of.
It's being invested.
presented
And
in our.
that's not complicated, you do that anyway, you've already
We
done
do.
that.
Yes.
Presented in our budget book, we show year by year how much has been spent on each project. So you will see that eventually on how many dollars have been physically
Yeah,
spent.
but it'll affect the budget if we don't have enough money to finish these projects, and we have to take it out of the water.
I assume we've kind of over budgeted most of these. I mean, you never.
Well, be careful about assuming.
Okay. This is true. Well, I will tell you, not one project will take off if we don't have the funding to fulfill it. And
Okay.
so like down here in this, the gray section, the other projects in progress, so Travis Street Pump Station, as you were talking about, you know, the longer these projects take to come to life, the more expensive
More
it
it
gets.
costs.
This was a 2023 project that EIC was gonna fund, $750,000. Well, it rolled around to 24, we still hadn't gotten anywhere because TCEQ wouldn't give us the approvals
Yeah.
and all that, so we realized, oh, that project's had to bump up. We bumped it up to $1 million, and some of that money came from undesignated. Still didn't move, so here we are in 26, and it's finally getting there, and we are now at a $1.4 million project. So it's had to been,
So anyway, all that information is way more valuable than any of this column here,
okay.
right? Because this column really doesn't mean anything.
Well,
it
when-
just
Because those numbers,
generates
I mean, it was
questions, that's all.
allocated in the beginning, but that
Which is
doesn't tell us
good.
a thing about where we are today.
And until we know
Is that
the
right?
costs, yeah, we don't issue contracts until we know the costs. We don't have the money, we
We can
don't
get
know
So this doesn't tell us a thing
And
about
the
today.
difference is being invested.
It's, yes, whatever has not been spent is being invested. We can get y'all the actual encumbered amount, and we can get y'all the actuals of where it's spent now in the project update. We can do that.
Would be a significant amount of money invested too, so.
Well, it just figures into this year's budget and next year's, you gotta be accounting for all that. If it's not completed, it's gonna be cost overruns or whatever, all that has to be
Yes, we
included in the coming budgets, right? So it hasn't been.
No, we do. I mean, we track it regularly.
Well, I
It's
know,
just a lot of.
but the numbers that were short here, are those budgeted in, because you made a budget for this year, next year, next year, next year. So are those numbers in those numbers?
I don't have it lined out like that for this presentation, but it is in the budget book as actuals year over year with an overall project budget.
And where the
Yes.
money's coming from.
And where the money's coming
Okay, so when you budget for CIP projects in those coming years, is, to do these first, or we gonna, or some of these, are they gonna be?
Kyle, you
first?
want to speak to that?
So, anyway,
I can have to sit down with you on how it's depicted year over year.
And the bonds do have to be very specific, especially nowadays. So this bond, very specific, those projects are part of that list, and we have to fall in line with those
there's a
projects.
time frame to get them started.
It depends. So some, like the EIC bond, for example, had kind of a time limit, which was 3 years. Not all bonds have those, it just depends. So we'd have to look at the bond language to see what it is. However, if they did have restrictions on it, we would fall in line with those restrictions or the time limitations to make sure that the projects
Okay,
are
so
started
if
on
there's
time.
time limitations, I mean, it's been 3 years already.
Correct. But every bond is a little bit different, so we just have to look at which one it is.
We can definitely get you the detail. We have it, it's just not to that level of detail for this.
Just other projects that are in progress, obviously the Elm Creek reclaimed water line that we're gonna talk about tomorrow evening, that, we have $530,000 allocated for the consor consulting as well as the design of that project. And that is where we are stopping at the moment. That's the funding we have for that part of the project. We'll have to make sure the concept is what we want it to be, and then we'll decide how we're gonna move Crinle Creek Interceptor Project. $5.3 million project, and that is funded by an EDA grant. EIC is paying for the design and engineering, and then we obviously have the developers that came in to help with the match of that grant. So we are using other sources where we can, and looking at the benefits of what it's going to provide to the community, obviously. And then we also have some old stuff, this Lowest Street Storage Tank. That's a $4 million project, and we're using old Texas Water Development Board dollars. We finished the TTHM mitigation project back in 2020, I suppose. And we had to put in for approval to move those remaining funds, it's like $750,000, move it over to this same type of water project to finish using up those monies. They don't want to give us the money back, or we don't want to have to give them the money back. They allow us to move it on to something else to finish it out. And then the rest is being covered by the 23 water revenue bonds and some undesignated funds we had in capital improvements already.
It's not a budgetary question, but do we have any idea, because that seems like that is the #1 complaint that I get on lift stations or water or something like that, is when is the Lowest Street project gonna be through?
So, yeah, so the most.
Not a
recent-
complaint, just a question.
Yeah.
That's, it's always, when's this gonna be done? Y'all been working on this for.
Texas Water Development Board, they submitted the project in August to the Texas Water Development Board. We were waiting for approval from them. Just recently, within the last few weeks, we submitted to Senator Flores and Representative Burdell, and within less than 24 hours, we got approval on it. So it took a little bit of legislative action in order to kind of press them along, and so now it's starting to move.
So we should see,
To answer your question, July 1st we'll get bids, so I will bring it to you sometime in July for council award. That's gonna be a 1.5-year long project though. So just,
at least we can say
Right.
something.
there is optimism inside.
The needle's moving, as David just
Yes.
said, so, instead of going, I don't
Right.
know, it's working. So, thank you, Kyle.
Yes, sir.
And just informational, the administrative work that goes into dealing with the Texas Water Development Board, it's a great tool for us for a funding source. But we're trying to close out old packages so that we can get our final reimbursements. And we actually have an escrow account that has $600,000 sitting in it because our money was held on to for so many years. But it takes a while to go through those steps and those closeouts. So we're working on 2 different packages that we may see the surplus of funds come back to us. All right, any further questions on CIP? Yes.
Okay, so before Trina hops into revenues, I want to kind of backtrack a little bit on our methodology, like how we got here, what have we done in the past few years. Most of you have been involved in that, but just want to make sure that have that top of mind. So in 25, we did change our water model, and we've talked about this a lot. That's what we use to forecast revenue. So what is our consumption and a whole lot of other factors that we use, and at this rate or that rate or this level of consumption, what kind of revenues are produced from that. So in 25, we went back and said this isn't working, and so we're gonna change this model. And we significantly reduced dependency on irrigation. That was the #1 thing we did. We were in a period of drought, 3 straight years, and we were in a model that was too reliant on irrigation to meet our revenue demands at the end of the year. And so we changed that model. Our operating costs, again, they don't change much. So if we use more water, that doesn't necessarily mean that costs are going to go up. If we use less water, that doesn't mean costs are going to go down. And so we do have to keep that in mind when budgeting. But the idea was, create a water model that makes sense, that is attainable, so that we weren't having to worry about shortfalls in our water revenues and wastewater revenues. And that if we had excess that came in, that we would come back to council and say we had excess revenues, and we'd like to use those for sustainability measures and how this looks. And so really this change was necessitated, as I said, 3 years of drought, and what we were seeing was constant shortfalls based on the model we were using. Using averages doesn't work. And when you put a heavy impact while charging higher rates for irrigation is the right thing to do because of conservation. If you're adding those rates at that irrigation consumption, and that consumption doesn't happen, you're having shortfalls. So really did a whole lot of work, and I can't give credit to anyone but Trina for that. It is a lot to dig into every little piece and break that apart. And she's been doing that every year, and it's working, I will say. It's taken a couple years to get there. Backing up a little further, in 2019, we did a complete water rate study. Some of you may remember, and NewGen completed that for us, and they recommended this structural change to where we were more reliant on the base charges for dependability of revenue, and we just weren't there as a community. We had COVID hit right after that. We had massive inflation, and we really had a desire to really reduce pressure on the end user, which is top of our mind all the time. And one of the reasons that we try to present the customer impact statement anytime we're talking about rates, so that you can see if we do this, then this is the impact to the average household or to the volumetric user or whatever that is. And so that didn't happen. And so we had many, I would say 4 years at least, maybe 5, with no rate increases at all. And so, you know, we just have found ourselves in a pickle, I guess. And what happened is we weren't transferring money to sustainability, and we weren't taking care of our assets and those things. So when we kind of changed this model the first year, you know, we saw definite progress. In 24, we had, just in water sales line, not to the fund, $1 million shortfall in our budget. Last year, after we changed this method, we were still 200 and something short in that line item, but that's a far cry from the million that we were using the prior model. Right now, we are tracking, like our budget is tracking right in line with budget. That makes us happy. If we have excess funds, of course, then we will let you know that, and then we will get direction on how you want to allocate those excess funds. But right now, it's directly in line with what we're doing. Revenue is a lot less predictable the way we were doing it before. Household budgets were less predictable. If we're impacting the base charge at a reasonable amount, which we know 25, it was tough. You know, we had some pretty significant increases of 25%, but we just hadn't touched them in so long. And when we laid those next to inflationary pressures and other things that we were seeing, we were deferring a lot of things because we just simply were not keeping our rates in line with what we need, and then also with the region. So Trina's going to talk about those kind of things too, but the idea is just keep promoting conservation measures, of course, because that, you know, is on the forefront. Water is a hot topic always, but at the same time, take care of the systematic needs that we need to take care of. So in 26, we had smaller increases only to the base rate. We didn't impact volumetric users at all, which is really, in my opinion, more ideal from a budgetary standpoint, because I know that a regular household uses X water, and that doesn't vary very much. And so if I know my water rate's gonna go up $5, well then I can budget on that in a household. If it's gonna vary based on my user, my volume, well then it's a lot harder for me to budget. So we're kind of trying to keep both, creating more stable revenues within our fund, but also, you know, thinking about the end user all the time and the customer. We're customer facing. So any decision that is made in this room, I can promise you, we are the first people to see and hear about that, maybe minus you at HEB. But with that being said, we do think about our customers and have a relationship with those people. So that is something we think about on a regular. So we don't take these recommendations lightly at all. And have definitely tried to give you the best data that we can without you having to get down into the detail that Trina has to look at. So with that, I'm gonna let her talk to you about what we're proposing and recommending, and then get some feedback from you guys.
All right, so, yes, our methodologies for landing where we land is honestly trial and error. So we have to kind of back into it. We know what all our expenditures are, we know what all our sustainability pieces are, and where we're trying to go. The past few years, we have missed revenues, and it was one reason or another. But looking at 27 proposed revenues, so these revenues do include rates that line up better with the other cities in our region. We'll show you some comparisons to the other cities here in a second. It is definitely difficult to do apples to apples comparisons with any of this stuff. I mean, just for the simple fact that some cities don't have the same facilities we have. They have to go a different route to supply the utilities they have. You know, for instance, Kyle, they pipeline in their water in May of 2025. That's how they started bringing in water, and those customers are paying for it. Our water and sewer system are very diverse. We have a topography that we have to work around. There's tons of lift stations and pump stations to get that water and sludge where it needs to be. So it does cost us a little bit more to have an ASR well and and all those things. For the revenues, it is industry standard for us to bill on a variable rate structure, and that is a base rate and a tiered rate. So base rate, regardless if you use water or not, you're gonna have a charge. And then if you do use water, we will bill you on that consumption you use on the tiered scale. Our irrigation rates, we do have those on our fee schedule as higher rates. So for instance, the residential per 1,000 gallon charge is $3.51. An irrigation rate starts at $5.23. So if you want your grass green and growing, then you have to pay a little bit more cost, unfortunately. Our residential base rate, as well as on the sewer side, it does include 1,000 gallons. As Julie said, we are always trying to protect the customer. We live in an elderly community, and I guarantee you they probably use less than 1,000 gallons a month. So they are getting to pay just the base rate. But after that 1,000 gallons, then we'll have to start calculating it out. So for fiscal year 27, our proposed base rate will generate approximately $3.3 million. That is 40% of our overall water revenues. As Julie said, we're trying to get to around 50% so that we can sustain our system when there's drought conditions or when irrigation is behind and we're not seeing those higher revenues on the higher tiered scales. So I think we're moving forward. Last year we were at $3.1 million in base rate charges, and that was 39%. So it's gradually going to move because the higher your revenues get, that percentage is going to take longer to get there. But we are working towards it diligently, at the same time keeping our citizen in mind on how that's going to impact them and their households. And then on the proposed sewer base rate, that will generate approximately $3 million, or equates to about 37%. Now that percentage seems a little bit further behind than the water, but looking at these other cities, I think we're tracking right in line of where they are and we are. I'll show you here in a second. Currently in fiscal year 26, we just wanted to point out that we are on track. We're tracking, but the year started out, we were in stage 2 when we started out, so people started irrigating and watering, but then the rain came in the spring, and so it slowed down. But we are tracking right on line. We had increased our base rate, and everything is falling where we want it to be. So I think we're doing a good job for the moment.
Can I ask you what the rate is? I know it's per 1,000 gallons, but.
So tiered scale, we have 6 different steps on the residential side. It starts at $3.51 per 1,000 gallons, and then I think it's 5,000 gallons at this rate, 10,000 at this rate, the next 25,000 at this rate.
Okay.
And it's in here
It's,
later.
A couple slides, but we'll
Yeah.
have the current one, and then we'll have the, so you'll be able to see them side by side.
So they're the 2 highest factors of our consumption on the water side is definitely the weather and drought conditions. So looking at this chart on the left, this is the rainfall inches by calendar year. So you can see the 30-year average, the red line at the top. 30-year average is about 28 inches of rain per year. 24, 25, we were well under that. This year through May of 26, which is the yellow line, we have received 13.5 inches of rain. But the 30-year average through May, the 30-year average is 11 inches of rain. So we have surpassed that at this moment in time, and you'll see here on this next slide, the consumption has dropped off because of the heaviness of the weather we've had. And over to the right, we just wanted to point out how many conservation stages we've been in since 2023. We have moved probably every couple of months, and that does impact what we see on the irrigation side as well as the domestic side.
There was one year, I believe it was in 25, where we were in stage 3 the entire year. So that kind of gave us a really good baseline of if we are in stage 3 with those conditions or factors, we can anticipate this. So as we use that kind of as the basis for changing some of the base rates, reducing the need for irrigation, and shifting that model.
All right, so this shows you the consumption chart over the last 3.5 years, which goes into this year. If you were interested in the gallons consumed, that is the legend down at the bottom. The yellow highlight on that legend is the beginning of our fiscal year through today, through May bills. But you can see the April and May yellow line where we have reduced since the weather picked up here this spring. It's not throwing us off kilter as of now, but if it continues, then I don't know. We just don't know. There's a lot of unknowns a lot of times. But I think by us trying to keep that base charge where it is and keep growing towards that, we should still be able to bring in the revenues we need to keep operating.
And so January is always gonna be low. But we know that, so we can kind of make an exception, I guess, for that 1 month, because it normally wouldn't be, you know. We in our household try to keep it minimum, because that is what
Yes.
sets the,
That affects your super.
It affects
Yeah.
your sewer rates, so December, January, February, that's very.
but then November, December, it's full blast.
Yeah, it's still hot around here in Texas.
People are trying to keep that grass green a little bit longer.
All right, so fiscal year 27 proposed water and sewer rates. So we are proposing, we will be able to fulfill all the needs that we have depicted here as far as the transfers, operational needs, with a 5% base increase only on the water side, nothing to the tiers, because again, if the consumption's not there, we're not gonna obtain any of that revenue anyways on the tiers. And then on the sewer side, we're proposing 7% increase. That 7% is different than the 5%, obviously, because we're trying to work towards increasing that base rate to the more range. Again, I said it's 37% and the water is 40%, so we're just trying to get there. Next slide will give you the customer impact of what this is gonna do. So we showed you this before at different consumption amounts. This year, our sewer average is 5,400 gallons per household. It was last year 5,200 gallons. So it jumped up a little bit on us. So that you can see there in the gray line that average consumer with a household consumption of 5,400 gallons, their monthly change with these proposed rates will be $2.97 per month. That is actually the change for everyone because we are only changing the base charge. So regardless if you use 10,000, 90,000, that's gonna be the difference on your utility bill for water and sewer. And again, as Julie said, our top priority is being able to provide the services to our citizens with the most minimal impact that we can. And that's where this comes from.
And just to kind of make a note, at that 5%, we are still looking at the $130,000 deficit in the water. We are going to be working on trying to close the gap on that, just operationally. Again, thinking 3 years out, we know that at a certain point, we're going to be able to hit it, and then we want to stabilize out on the base rates, because we ideally shouldn't have to do as high of a rate change or increase each year because of that debt falling off. So we are taking that into consideration, but we will still have to close the gap on about $130,000.
All right, so this here will give you a comparison of where we will be at on the base charges compared to other cities. This is their 2026 rates, and this is our proposal of 27 rates. Do keep in mind that, yes, fiscal year 25 we did, or 24 we did a 25% increase. 25 we started that jump to 25% base charge increase. This year we did another 5% increase, and then 27 we're proposing another 5% increase. And I know that sounds like a lot. These rates are showing where we will land with those increases over the last few years. So Kerrville's base charge was looking at $26.68. That is third from the cheapest at the top, comparing to the surrounding cities, San Antonio, some rural areas, Bernie, Georgetown. You can see Pflugerville down there is kind of costly. We definitely looked at different areas. We used to compare to cities with the same amount of debt in our size, because it went hand in hand. What type of dollars do you need to pay your debt? But now we're looking at, rural communities who may have to supplement the way they get their utilities and whatnot. Okay, the next slide is the wastewater charge. So, as I said, we thought wastewater was kind of behind on the base charge, but if you see that, we're kind of there in the middle. Looking at other cities' rates, for some reason sewer is a little bit less on the base charge than what water is, so we are making our way there, and I guess we're not technically so behind that we thought we were. $25.98 is what we're proposing compared to the other cities. All right, and one more slide showing comparisons will be what the cost would be for a 5,400 gallon consumption bill on your water and sewer for the city of Kerrville. So looks like a total base charge of $97.76, and you can see the comparisons to the other cities there. Again, Pflugerville and Kyle are up there because they have to bring in their utility sources from other places, and everything that goes into that is just more high dollar as a pass-through to the customer.
On that proposed rate slide, a few back, you can see the split on the percent of residential accounts. So that 5,400 is about 61% of customers.
I'm sorry, what was that?
If you go back a few slides to the 27 proposed rates, you can see the split on how many customers fall into which tier. So that 5,400 being our average, of course, or most, 61% of our customers fall into that range.
So, our costs are higher, two obvious reasons. ASR wells and the reuse pond are not cheap. So that has to do with the wastewater so much, but at least with the water.
Yes, sir, and we also operate 2 water treatment facilities on the surface side, so the membrane system and the other system, which David and them can speak to that. So our system is very robust compared to many other cities.
So
Things are on this report.
Correct.
Filter twice.
Yes, yeah, we have one conventional surface water plant and then the membrane, so two separate systems.
Two separate.
And also the GAC system, which got installed in 2023 or 2019.
It's about 2021.
Yeah, and so that was kind of treats the TTHMs and some of the other chemicals, so that got added in.
So are they in line, or if you got those are two separate?
Two separate systems.
And the THC thing, is that just for one little line or
Nope,
both lines?
they combine into one line and both flow through the GAC system.
About 260.
So, but they're all at the same place over on.
Correct, yes, sir.
And why do we have two? Just because when we added one, we just did a different one than we
Just a
did
different one. It was smaller footprint on the membrane facility.
So, newer technology.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thanks.
So we're on the cutting edge.
That's right.
That's what you're looking at.
Well, anyway, they're getting more value. Of course, I guess, at least we have some, and we need reserves. It's more expensive for us because we don't have the water that some of these, a lot of these are more in the rain belt than we are, I suppose, as far as.
Yeah, what's
Right,
flooding
I
and
mean,
drainage?
It's cheaper for them to call money, good water just out of the rivers or whatever. They probably got more river water than we
Yeah, and the other thing we don't know, which I'm sure we could probably find out on some of these, is what do they transfer out? Some of these places will use the enterprise, to fund more significantly the general fund. That is one area the state is trying to go after. At least they have for the last few legislative cycles. They haven't been successful yet. But that's the other thing we don't know is what is the transfer out of their water fund to others. So that's just something we don't know.
Point.
All right, any more questions on residential water rates? All right, we're gonna jump into reclaim water rates. So, last year we did a total overhaul of the reclaim billing. And just to back you up a little bit, so our old rates used to generate approximately $178,000 a year in revenues. But over to the left, you'll see that we have annual debt payments at $1.7 million a year. And then we capture the operating costs for that reused pond, all the chemicals and repairs and things that go into it every year, for a total of $1.8 million in expenses to have a reuse system, pretty much. Our new tiered rate revenue scale, we basically bumped up the base charge drastically, and then we started working on a tiered scale. It used to be just a flat rate across the board for every 1,000 gallons they use, but we jumped up into tiers. That way, the more they used, the cost was higher per 1,000. In 2026, using the consumption we had historically average, the consumption dropped a lot this year. And, you know, we had planned that, you know, once these rates come out, the user may decide, hey, I'm gonna reel back on that. And so we had like a 10-15% haircut on what we were originally planning. Well, our large volume users, on this next slide are Comanche, Shriner University, those folks. Comanche reduced 40% of their consumption this past year. And yes, it has been raining, we've had a wetter season, but that hurt a little bit. So we're gonna miss revenues this year, about 75,000 we're predicting. Not too bad, because overall we have still doubled our reclaim revenue because of the change in the structure that we did. You can see here graphically 2025 usage compared to 2026, and then the decline or increase that each of those users had. Overall consumption is down 36% across all users for fiscal year 26 so far. But we still anticipate to end $200,000 more than we did last year, and I think we're making good moves to where we're going with this system.
You could say that our talks on conservation are the reason.
Yeah,
I mean,
definitely.
A little of it, maybe?
Trina, if you had if Shriner University came back after Comanche cut theirs 40% and said, hey, we want to add 15%, could we do that? Since they cut their usage?
That's what we're looking at. We're looking at the contracts and the usage per contract compared to, so we have
An amount that we're obligated to provide. But then you want to compare that to what are they actually using? And do we have capacity to move that somewhere else? Maybe bring on another customer or just get creative with our water. So I think that's what we're going to be doing over the next year, is evaluating actual consumptions versus contract amounts. And I've thought about that as far as, yeah, can I borrow some of the capacity that this customer has, or renegotiate the contract? Maybe they don't need that much water anymore. Maybe lower that, or do a take or pay. Or so. I definitely want to look at those contracts to see if we can make some changes.
And I'll say again too, zero scale is definitely more popular and more prevalent now than it has been.
Well, this is for the golf course, so.
Oh, sorry.
This is reclaimed water for the golf
Okay.
course. So, they'll have a minimum amount that they agreed to buy.
some do. There's a couple
Some
of
do,
contracts.
some don't.
Yes, sir.
That are a take or pay, I think River Hill.
And Shriner.
And Shriner.
We're gonna try to not Comanche.
So we want to look at all that and see if we can renegotiate those contracts.
So on the next page here are the actual reclaim rates we're proposing for 2027. The base charge will stay the same, that's $171 a month. And then the tiers will increase by 15%. So these were the original scenarios we put out when we did this reclaim revamp. So we're kind of going to go with it. We want to see where it can go, maybe 2-3 years, and see if it's helping take care of some of the needs that the system has. This new rate for 2027 should generate approximately $435,000 for the year, and comparing that to $178,000 where we used to be per year, I think we're making good progress. Over to the right are benchmarking, obviously, to other cities or those who have a reclaim system anyways. Some of them still bill on flat rates and some of them have tiered rates. But even so, our base charge is right in line. It's still below the average. We may not want to go that high, but we're looking at median range also. And then the price per 1,000 gallons is also right in line with other entities are doing.
It's still substantially less if they were using total, of course, and then the savings for total system.
Yeah. All right, that's all we have on the rates for fiscal year 2027 and how that's going to generate the revenues we need. All that being said, we always put this out, helpful resources for our consumers. We deal with multiple agencies around town. If anyone needs assistance with their utility bills, there's entities out there that will assist. They have some of their own requirements, but there are ways to get help. And the city of Kerrville also has a little donation fund that other neighbors can give to other neighbors. Called the Neighbor Assistance Program. So if they want to donate $5 with while they're paying their bill, then it goes into a pot and we hand it over to one of the agencies to assist. This year, or we were doing some analysis, so fiscal year 25, we received $53,000 from outside entities on helping our consumers pay their utility bills, and then already here in May of 26, we've received $55,000 so far this year. So the need is there, definitely around the community, and I know we have a surplus of funds around town right now, but you know, this is a precious resource that everyone needs, and for them to keep that source there, the help is there.
Is there a way to track that, or do you think that could be because what we went through last year, that we have that huge influx of funds for this year? Or just, is it just kind of year to year?
Yeah, we can look year over year of what each individual entity provided to us, and then, you know, we may have to just take that into consideration if
Just
we know the influx of cash.
Yeah, and as we look at the next, 3 to 5 years, each year we'll obviously reevaluate it. As base rates or tiered rates, as we look at the future, trying to cover the cost, we can always increase, some of the measures, for our, LMI populations or, underserved kind of populations or underrepresented populations. So we can look at that as well and adjust and come up with, new programs or new opportunities. So we're constantly looking at that.
And Rebecca and her teams work with these agencies
Yep.
daily, as far as, where's the need, and we refer people there, and it's constant communication with these entities, so they're very good at what they do, so.
So how do we get to the 53,000 and 55,000 numbers? How does that get?
That's actual money that we receive.
Well, I get that, but why is it that number?
So people who need the money will request, funds from
So
CAM.
somebody, the customer is
Yes.
requesting,
So twofold.
so we don't decide that?
No,
it's just
sir.
like-
No, sir.
No.
So they apply and then
That's correct.
somebody else pays?
That's
So if
right.
somebody rounds up their bill, we may only contribute $5,000 from our customers rounding up their bill. But the resources through NAP and through CAM, they could request whatever they want, and then they have additional resources that they can provide, which again could exceed what our customers doing, and that's for all of Kerr County.
Is there a limit as to single household
Every agency's different.
different, yeah?
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons we would rather contribute to them and let them do
And
what
let
they
them
do.
that.
Because we definitely don't want to be in the management of, who
Correct.
gets assistance and who doesn't. But CAM has some specific parameters as far as how many times a year you can request help. And
Right.
St. Vincent's is a little bit different. Some are utility only, some are housing, some are, so there's a lot of resources out there for people. It's just sometimes they don't know. And I think that's why we like to bring this to the table and then also have our folks in the utility office communicating with customers. Even if it's not their utilities they're having issues with, they can at least have resources so we can make those referrals and connect people to the right resources. So we do that on a regular basis.
All right, so I'm done. Next steps for this budget, Julie?
So $130,000 deficit, that's a little bit different than we've seen in the past few years. We've been able to find a way to balance it. We really wanted to keep our recommendation to base rate only and not start increasing tiers to close that gap. And so as the next month and a half goes on, we'll really consider, what those options are. We get actual numbers on group health that we're hoping that it's less than we thought and that can close some of the gap. We'll see what that comes back. We don't have our final quote on our other insurances yet. We have a really good idea what that's gonna be. So we'll look at that, and then, of course, ongoing other expenses that have a pretty big impact, the gas. Just other things that we're tracking on a regular basis, utility costs and those kind of things. We can consider reduction in some of our sustainability measures, and we have pretty good handle on what that forecast looks like going forward, and so, we feel like, we could do this or that, to get us in balance. It's not maybe ideal or what we wanna do, but we know that there's, I'm gonna call it a getting off place. There's some relief, in our next few years, and we keep talking about that big debt payoff, but, that's a pretty big payment that is not gonna be on our plate anymore. And so if we continue to be conservative over the next few years, I feel like we can get there and still maintain the sustainability that we need to maintain. So we have some options. We've listed additional rate increases on here as an option. We are not recommending that. That of course is for this council to decide. If you have specific ways you'd like us to close that gap, but just know that we are monitoring the big pieces as much as we can and hope to bring you back by our July workshop that we were able to close this gap and how we would do it. So we're not worried. I'm not worried about $130,000 on 18 million. I think we can get there. We're just gonna have to continue doing the work that we do. So that's my recommendation, but
Yeah.
of course, whatever feedback.
A couple significant things on there is, we made, in this budget, we made the recommendation to go from 4% to 5% on the franchise fee. A lot of that is basically to say, hey, if we're gonna do it for our enterprise, or if we're gonna request it from KPUB, to go to potentially 4 or 5%, then we need to put our money where our mouth is too, so enterprise for enterprise. So that was one reason. If we pulled that back down to 4%, that would obviously close the gap a little bit more. Historically, I think we've usually only done 15% increase on group health, and we said, nope, we're going to 30% because that's what we're anticipating, and we're navigating that very delicately. And so more to follow. We're actually going to be bringing that to y'all in the first meeting in August, not in the end of July, which we've historically done. So we are going right up to the last pretty much moment to make sure that we get everything right on there. Sustainability, obviously we've increased sustainability incrementally, so we are looking at the next kind of 3 years. The goal is to continue to increase sustainability to be able to cover the cost and still build a fund balance for future projects, fixed asset, general facilities, and all those things. So not too concerned again, not concerned really at all. We do have some options in there. We just, again, wanting to get y'all's feedback. One, I think the big one is on KPUB. Do y'all want us to kind of start researching that and diving into more details for the general fund? And then what are y'all's thoughts on the base rates? Which direction do y'all want to go? And kind of go from there.
I've written down the stuff I need to ask the council. Do you want to talk about that now? Do you want them to begin the initial background work on the KPUB franchise fee? Not that we're increasing it, but we're finding out what the possibilities are.
Have we already done that, like in 2019 or something?
No.
It's never been
Okay,
changed.
No, we have some data, but we didn't want to go much further until we knew if that was even an appetite that you had.
Is that on the table, though? Do we have consensus for that?
I think so.
I think so.
Just to do the background.
In this presentation so far, we've had a proposal on water rates, a proposal on sewer rates, and a proposal on reclaimed water rates. You all feel comfortable with those proposals? Ms. Smith, for your, you're just kind of, this is just new.
We need 15 minutes explanation of what you.
And the truth is, a couple of years ago, we had a frank discussion that we were selling water for much less than it was costing us to produce water. And so we encouraged staff to propose a new formula, a new way to charge for it and rely less on irrigation and more on direct customer use.
I think it was pretty well known that the reused water plant was going to be a big negative cash flow. That's not a surprise. So I think it's great that we've made steps to close the gap a little. I mean, it's really more of an insurance policy, I suppose, to have some extra water. We really had some.
And if council goes forward with Elm Creek.
Right. Well, then we need to have the permit that says we get to keep and use that water. If we're just spending more money to do Elm Creek and then we have no.
Understand.
Yeah. I would say, well, since I'm just talking,
You got the floor.
I think we could raise the tiers a little bit. I think I'm very much sensitive to the lower income and to the extent that some of the lower tiers maybe not would need to be raised, but some of the higher tiers maybe we can afford to pass along. Our water rates are still cheap compared, and we have more expenses because we have less water supply than a lot of cities that I see on that list. And so we have every reason to be a little higher, and that doesn't mean we need to go crazy, but we do need to, we should be balancing the budget a little better. And I'm not sure I'm buying, talk about that a little more about, well, so the debt's gonna roll off. In the beginning of this meeting, we talked about, well, we're looking about when can we borrow more? You know, I mean, that was some of the discussion, wasn't it?
Yes.
So, you know, I would say, I'd rather we budgeted right and we don't have to borrow more. You know, I mean, it's, I think, you know, as opposed to the general fund, we don't have, we can charge some more, and compared to other cities, we have room to charge some more. And we don't have to hit the low users. You know, we got ways to do it without hitting the little ladies, you know, at home alone. So, I think we could do that, and I think the reuse part of the thing is we're stepping it up. You know, we can't just knock them over, we're gonna, you know, but I think, so we got less usage, but we got more cash. That was a good step forward. And, so, but, I'm just a little concerned more about, for the water fund, what the CIP is, and that we fund that fully, and that we understand, well, with the CIP budget, does that include the 23, if there's, maybe there's, is that included, we're short some there because price increases, well, we put that into the CIP budget as well. So, but I think we got the flexibility, at least in the water fund, to raise our revenues that we don't have. We only have what we got on the general fund side. And so we really need to be having franchise fees be, if 6% is kind of typical across the board, we need to be getting the 6% because the general fund needs that money. And we don't need to go 10% to do something crazy, but we, you know, if it's kind of a standard thing, we need to work our way up and get that. Help out the general fund all we can.
And I'll say on the debt capacity, you know, we know that debt, specific debt that we're talking about falling off, perhaps could have been structured better so that we didn't have such high payments on the backside. So even in the event that we did have capacity to issue future debt, which in my opinion is not irresponsible, as you know, we're sharing the cost of larger expenses with, you know, people over time. However, I'm not sure that $1 million payment would be structured. You know, as long as, especially if you keep me here, I would propose that we structure that a little bit better so that it has less impact, even if you were to issue future debt, so that it doesn't have such a big hit like the one we're dealing with right now.
Well,
that's why, one of the reasons we're looking forward to that one in particular rolling off.
It puts us in a negative for a little while.
Yes, sir, but soon.
So what I'm hearing consensus for is that we would like staff to do the initial background work on the K-Pub franchise fee. And on the water rates, at least one of us says that we could be a little bit more aggressive on some of the upper tiers. And the sewer rates and the reclaimed water rates are going in the right direction. So, a fair recap? Okay, good.
We could bring you back the impact of that if you wanted us to. It may not be as significant, but we'll certainly.
Is that everything that you needed from us on that section? Thank you.
So do you want us to try to build to that 130,000 on those upper tiers? Is that what the direction is? Or as close to it as we can get, or what would you like to see on the?
I thought, from my understanding was that the proposed rates would cut into that 130, would it not?
What we're proposing right now, at those
Still
proposed
keeps the
rates, we have that
130.
130, but there's still a lot of moving parts that we have to work through, so I'm not.
Group health is the
concerned
big
about
one.
that.
Give us some scenarios then.
Okay, that way you can decide.
We wanted to add hours to your work.
Well, she has the model built out, so,
Okay.
it's
We can
easy,
play
right,
with it.
Trina?
Yes, it's simple. Yes,
Okay.
it's not, it won't be too big.
The model wasn't simple, but now that you have it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
she has it built out. Yeah, it's easy for Trina. Okay, so we'll bring that back to you at the next meeting and give you an idea. And we'll know a lot more about expenses by then too, by the time we meet in July. Okay, so I'm gonna go over other funds that we have completed to date quickly. There's not big significance to some of these, and remember, these guys are ones that do not have a balanced budget requirement. They operate independently, not necessarily enterprise funds. So Garage Fund, for example, services the entire city. This is funded by, it's an internal service fund, so it's funded by both the general fund and the water fund proportionately to the number of assets that they service for each. So you can see, last year, this year's budget and what we're proposing going forward. Of course, they're balanced right now, of course, until we get the health insurance things. This could change a little bit, but fairly simple on the Garage Fund, outlines all their expenses. I believe they have 4 staff over there, is that right? Yeah, so anyway, David and Chris are over the garage, so if anybody has any specific questions about that. Then looking at the next ones, Library Memorial and Library Endowment, so those 2 funds are both restricted for any operations to support the library. Library Memorial is its own fund. Right now, it's a little bit cash light, but over the past 5 years, we've had a lot of projects come out of that, and some good things have happened. So updated the lighting, built the stairs, updated the HVAC, of course, contribution to the museum. So there's been a lot of things. So a little bit cash light in that fund right now, but our proposal is to move some money from endowment, which is, again, restricted to support the library. We don't capitalize anything in this fund, so we try to keep expenses on the lighter side there and move that over to Memorial to be able to support what's going on and proposed as far as regular library memorial expenses, which is books and materials, things that are capitalized, some lighting controls, things like that, and some Wi-Fi and building maintenance. So not a whole lot of expenses, but that's why those 2 funds you can kind of see working together from one page to the next there.
So the library has an endowment?
We do. It was established in 1986 when someone passed away, and they basically said, we want to give all this money to the library, but we're giving it in the form of an endowment. And it has been an interesting turn of events over the last 8 years, getting that money moved over from Wells Fargo's trust to our internal trust. But we have half of that is restricted, so we can never use it. So that money stays invested, about $620,000 or so of that stays invested at all times. And then what we make on that fund, plus the other 600 that was initially in there, plus some donations that have come along since then, is up for anything that supports the library. So we're pretty careful with that to make sure that that money is staying tied up so that it's growing, especially over the last few years. It's been had pretty good growth.
So you don't take some out every year, or?
Sometimes we do. It really depends on which fund, I guess, is more healthy. We don't put anything capital out of library endowment because it's just another accounting thing that we have to do. So pretty much if we're buying books and any capital improvements, those come out of Library Memorial, because those are technically property of the general fund when it's all said and done for financial reporting. So we do take a little bit out, but we try to make sure there's growth, and then we have that $600,000 that we can never touch. So that stays invested all the time. If that's clear as mud. 2 different funds, both restricted for library. But it's the way they were legally set up, so we cannot change that endowment. History Center, again, part of the library campus, pretty routine expenses there. They don't have a lot of expenses over there. Staff of the library support that facility. So just some supplies, maintenance, and then a few other things that they pay for. Their revenue comes from a trust and then also from interest revenue. That one again is restricted to that facility. And then we talked a little bit earlier about PEG. So we do get franchise fees here, about between $40,000 and $50,000 every year. So we base that estimate based on what has been happening. And then some technology equipment comes out of here, camera equipment, some software equipment, those kind of things that basically are supporting this meeting today to make that live. And then also recording those for future, and then also our public television, where when we do budget publications and those kind of things, for those of you who watch public television, I think it's Channel 2 in Kerrville, you will see all of those as a rolling message as part of the requirement of the state that we use that big channel.
And the reason why expenditures are higher this year, we are trying to automate some more things, make it a little bit more efficient back there, so it's not a single point of failure or, one person knows the system, because it is a pretty complicated system, so we're trying to streamline it and improve that.
From the shortage of the general fund? Or they
There
got-
is a fund
Usually
balance,
okay.
yeah.
Yeah, we have a fund balance there, Charlie manages that, and so she keeps a pretty tight grip on those funds. And so, we don't budget more than we have in that fund. 100,000 fund balance, thank you, Trina. So, not a big fund balance, but enough to cover the things that we use it for. So then we were gonna open it up for discussion, whether it be water fund, other funds, future funds, projections, anything you might wanna know, see different, have ideas for, or direction for us as we prepare for the next workshop.
So the next one will be more broken down into departments.
Next one is gonna be general fund.
Yes,
the
general fund, okay.
fund. That one's bigger.
Yeah.
Obviously, we have more departments, more moving parts, more restrictions on revenues. So we'd like to do water first because we know more. It's just too soon to really talk in detail about general fund because we just don't know enough about the pre-tax yet.
This is a breeze compared to
Yes, sir.
And y'all will see the same kind of setup on this where you'll have different divisions or departments. We didn't talk about this in detail, just again, 100,000 foot view, but this will dive into each division. We'll have the same for the general fund. That way y'all can see, for me, I like to see plus or minus 10% on specific categories or line items. So you're able to dive a little bit further into the next layer without going into too much detail and deciding, how many boxes of pens we need. But and then we try to put a description, or we do put a description next to it if it is plus or minus 10%, whether it's savings or an expense.
And those notes are, what we do internally is we present, departments bring their budgets to present to the budget committee. So this isn't something that we've produced for council before, but I think after we went through the local resiliency committee, we really saw an interest in looking at a little bit more detail, but not to the 50 line items or more that are in each division, but this just gives you a little bit more in-depth view of what's happening and might generate some questions. So we are pretty close to finishing our sheets for the general fund, so I would anticipate having those a week ahead of time for the next budget workshop, so that you can see those and have, questions if you have them answered for you before that time.
What else do you need from us today?
I think we got some direction on the two things we were really looking at, so we will bring back some information on K-12 data. I'll get with Dalton and we'll decide, what makes the most sense to bring you, and then, we'll build some scenarios on if-then, on the higher tiered water rates, what is that impact, so that we can bring that back to the next council. So any other direction, any discussion, or things you'd like to see different, I think is what we really need.
Mayor, do you have one thing?
Go ahead, please.
So we did not add into this budget because we are going to bring it back to you as a stormwater drainage fee. So we, as David and them were kind of looking at it, when we had first brought it to y'all, there were some discrepancies we wanted to hash out and align with the numbers. So we will be bringing that back to y'all in the coming weeks, likely before that. So if it does get included, we will let y'all know that it is being included, but it is not included into this one. This is without the stormwater drainage fees.
And one other important thing to note, Jacob is a newlywed.
Congratulations.
Trina and I are on our own for 2 weeks, so
They're gonna be all right.
feel sorry for us, we don't know if we'll live. We're on our own for a couple weeks while he goes and celebrates.
Congratulations.
Thank
So,
you.
Anything else? Council? All right, we're adjourned at 11:57.